It's past midnight. You're tired, genuinely tired. You've been tired since 4 p.m. But here you are, phone in hand, still awake, watching your brain do the thing it always does. Move from one thought to the next, with no particular destination and no sign of stopping. You've tried putting the phone down, you put it down, you picked it back up 11 minutes later. And now there's a second layer on top of the first. The awareness that tomorrow is already compromised, that you'll be behind before it starts, that this keeps happening, and that you don't fully understand why. This video is about that why, not about sleep hygiene, not about screens and blue light and chamomile tea, about the specific neurological reason the ADHD brain resists going quiet at night, and what that means for what you actually try instead. Let's start with what's actually happening in the brain when sleep won't come. Here's the first thing worth knowing. What you're experiencing at midnight is not insomnia in the standard clinical sense. It's not anxiety disorder. It's not poor sleep hygiene. It's something more specific, and it has a name. The ADHD brain has a measurably different relationship with something called arousal regulation. Arousal, in neurological terms, isn't about excitement. It's about the brain's activation level, the dial between fully alert and ready to disengage. In a neurotypical brain, that dial starts moving down on its own as the evening progresses. The default mode network, the system that runs when the brain isn't focused on a task, begins to quiet. The transition towards sleep begins without anyone having to manage it. In the ADHD brain, that dial doesn't move on schedule. Research on ADHD and sleep consistently shows that ADHD brains have delayed and disrupted arousal downshifting. The system that's supposed to say we're done for today either fires late, fires inconsistently, or doesn't fire with enough signal for the brain to actually follow it. This is not a metaphor. This is measurable in the brain, which means that every time you've told yourself, I just need more discipline at bedtime, you were applying a behavioral solution to a neurological problem. It makes complete sense that it didn't hold, not because you weren't trying. Because you were trying to manually override a system that was never going to respond to willpower the way a neurotypical system would. That's the first piece, and it changes what comes next. Now, let's look at why the strategies you've already tried haven't been able to stick. Let's be more specific about the mechanism. Because there isn't just one thing happening at night with the ADHD brain. There are several, and they compound each other. The first is the delayed sleep phase. Studies on ADHD populations consistently show a shifted circadian rhythm, the body clock running later than average, sometimes by 2 to 3 hours. This means the biology is genuinely not ready when the world says it should be. The tiredness you feel at 9 p.m. is often suppressed by a second wind around 10 or 11 that has nothing to do with your choices. The second is time blindness. The ADHD brain doesn't experience time as a continuous trackable resource. It experiences now, and not now, which means I'll sleep soon is not a plan the brain is holding. It's a phrase that exists outside of time. Soon collapses. And suddenly it's 2 a.m. and you genuinely don't know where the last 2 hours went. The third, and this is the one that makes the phone almost impossible to put down, is the dopamine loop. The ADHD brain is chronically understimulated in its baseline resting state. Scrolling provides micro hits of novelty at exactly the moment the brain is most starved for input. This is not a moral failure. This is a brain doing the only thing that's working to keep itself from the discomfort of understimulation in a dark room with no task to anchor it. The fourth piece is rejection sensitivity, the particular ADHD experience of emotional pain that hits harder and more suddenly than it does for neurotypical brains. At night, with no task to displace it, with the mind still running, the intrusive thoughts arrive. The conversation you handled badly, the thing you forgot, the email that's been sitting there, the version of tomorrow you're already dreading. There is nothing wrong with your ability to sleep. There is a brain that was never given the specific conditions it actually needs to land. And that distinction between a sleep problem and an arousal regulation problem is the thing that changes what you try. So what does the ADHD brain actually need instead? Here is the reframe that matters. The goal is not to force the brain quiet. The goal is to give it somewhere to land. Those are not the same instruction, and they lead to completely different approaches. Forcing quiet, no screens, no input, lie in the dark and wait for sleep, works for a brain whose arousal system is already downshifting on its own. For a brain whose arousal system is still running, that instruction removes every available landing place and leaves the brain with nothing to do except cycle through whatever it was already cycling through. Think of it this way. The ADHD brain at midnight is like a flight that's been circling for 2 hours. It's not refusing to land. It's waiting for the signal that it's safe to come down. And a dark room with no input is not that signal. What the brain is actually looking for is something that satisfies the need for stimulation without raising arousal further. Low novelty, low stakes, predictable. Something that gives the default mode network something gentle to rest on while the activation level slowly decreases. This is why certain podcasts work for some people. Not because audio in general is relaxing, but because a familiar voice on a familiar topic provides just enough input to keep the brain occupied without asking it to generate anything new. It's why rereading a known book can work when starting something new cannot. It's why some people find a specific playlist functions almost like a transition ritual. The brain learns that this particular sound is the on-ramp to sleep, not a new destination. The point isn't the specific tool. The point is the principle. The brain needs an off-ramp, not an off switch. And there's a second piece of this. The thoughts that cycle at night, the unfinished items, the unresolved conversations, the list of things that didn't happen today. They cycle because they have nowhere to go. The default mode network in ADHD runs hotter than average. It is a system designed to process, connect, and retrieve. At night, with nothing to process, it keeps generating, giving it a place to deposit what it's holding. A short, unstructured brain dump. Not a to-do list, not a plan, just a page where the thoughts can exist outside your head is not a productivity technique. It's telling the brain, you don't have to hold this anymore. It's written down. You can let go. And here is the thing that takes a moment to sit with. The exhaustion you're carrying right now. The particular weight of lying awake knowing tomorrow is already compromised. That's not evidence of something wrong with you. That is the completely predictable experience of a brain that has been running a system it was never designed for. In a silence that gives it nothing to hold on to, trying to do something that no amount of effort was going to produce the way effort is supposed to work. Not laziness, not weakness, not drama. A brain still looking for its landing place. If what this video is describing maps onto your nights and onto the days that follow them, there's a resource in the description called Brain First Planning. Sleep is part of a larger architecture. How the evening structures, or fails to structure, itself affects the next morning, the next attempt, the next reset. This system was built around how the ADHD brain actually moves through a day and a night, not how productivity systems assume it should. The link is in the description. So here's what you can actually try, starting tonight. Here is what this looks like in practice. Not a routine, not a system to build. 3 adjustments you can try tonight, as experiments, not commitments. The first is a time anchor, because the ADHD brain loses time in both directions. Time blindness makes soon disappear. An external anchor takes the cognitive load of tracking the hour off your brain, not an alarm that says go to sleep. A prompt that says it's time to start moving toward it. The specific time matters less than the consistency of having a signal that exists outside your head. The brain learns that this sound means the landing process begins. Not that sleep happens now, that the approach starts now. The second is the brain dump, not a journal, not a reflection. A 2-minute deposit of whatever is running. The unfinished thought. The thing you're dreading. The item that's been orbiting all day. Write it down without any expectation that you'll do anything with it. The function isn't planning, it's offloading. The brain that was gonna cycle through those items for the next hour now has confirmation that they exist somewhere else. It doesn't have to hold them anymore. The third is the off-ramp, not the off switch. Choose something in advance, before you're already in bed, already tired, already making a decision with a depleted brain. Something low novelty, something known, something that gives the brain just enough to rest on while the arousal level comes down. Not television. Not anything that asks you to track a plot. Not a podcast about something you care about deeply enough to want to engage with fully. Something the brain can float on. And here is the objection that's probably arriving right now. I've tried routines. They don't stick. That's true. Routines built for neurotypical habit formation don't stick for ADHD brains because they require consistent execution across a cycle that isn't consistent. This isn't a routine. It's a re-entry protocol. The difference is that a routine requires streaks. A re-entry protocol only requires tonight. You don't need to have done this yesterday. You don't need to do it tomorrow. You need the time anchor, the page, and the off-ramp on the nights when you remember. And on the nights you forget, nothing resets to zero. The restart isn't failure, it's the cycle. If this opens something you want to take further, the Brain First planning resource in the description builds the full structure around what this video started. The link is also in the pinned comment. What does the 2 a.m. spiral look like for you? Is it the thoughts that won't stop? The scroll you can't quit? Or something else entirely? Here is what tonight can carry, if nothing else does. The brain that won't quiet down at night is not a broken brain. It is a brain whose arousal system runs on a different schedule, whose time sense makes soon disappear, whose need for stimulation doesn't switch off just because the lights did, and whose experience of all of this has probably been filed for years under personal failure. It wasn't personal failure. It was navigation without a map. The woman lying awake at 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., cataloging what didn't happen and dreading what will, she wasn't undisciplined. She was running a system that was never built to account for what her brain was actually doing. What this video covered isn't a fix. It's a translation. And here's what you can do with it. The next time you're in bed and the brain is still circling, you'll know what you're actually looking at. Not evidence of who you are, a brain still waiting for its landing signal, and now you know what that signal actually looks like. The time anchor, the page, the off-ramp. Not because small is better, because small is survivable tonight. And tonight is the only one that's in front of you right now. The thoughts that have been cycling, they've been looking for somewhere to land too. Put them on the page. Close it. That's enough for tonight. Not evidence. Navigation. She was never the problem. Neither are you.